About once a week these days, I find myself picking up one of Osprey's military history titles from one of the various sub-series. This week's happened to be one of the campaign series, one of the earlier ones, the 90th. This was on Arthur Wellesley, the later Duke of Wellington's first victory in the Peninsular campaign, where the British and their allies, the Portuguese and Spanish, fought their way into France. Perhaps most famously dealt with in the fictional Sharpe series by Bernard Cornwell. Like most Osprey titles, this is a brief, info-packed look at, in this case, a battle, the forces involved, the personalities of the commanding officers, and the aftermath. Before I go any farther, I should probably mention my usual disclaimer at this point. Yes, I own a small publishing company. Yes, we publish military history titles. No, nothing that would directly compete with this. I figure I should point it out, just in case. Now, back to the book. The book does manage to deal with the French invasion of Portugal and the Portuguese resistance to it, something that I hadn't read really much about in English, except covered in a couple of short paragraphs. The flight of the Portuguese royal family to Brazil usually gets talked about, but we are then quickly on to the landing of the British, the battle mentioned in the title, and then the political fiasco, the question of Wellington being superseded, and the scandal that resulted at home when the agreement between the British and French was announced. So it's nice to have something that deals with the tactics, strategies, and yes, combat involved. Why Wellington managed to achieve his first victory, and how it was squandered by the archaic rules of the British command system. As is also typical with an Osprey title, there is plenty of illustrations and reproductions of images with extensive captions that point out where they're accurate and when they're not. As always, Osprey would be an excellent series to look at if you're interested in military miniatures, modeling, that sort of thing. The biggest frustration I have is that, for whatever reason, with the Kindle version of the book, they've taken the decision to chop up the maps. For instance, the famous 3D maps that, if you've seen an Osprey, you'll be aware of the 3D generated maps that look like it's a relief map of a battle that looks like it's been sliced out of a tabletop. Well, here they've been cut into 4 segments appearing on different pages of the ebook version, which means that the important stuff, the stuff that's taking place in the center of the image, is pretty much obscured. Yes, I think I know why they did this, presumably because the text that is wrapped around the image that points out units, and for that matter, different parts of the military action, might be impossible to read on an ebook screen, but I believe that most modern ebook devices can allow for images to be pinched, zoomed in on, and the like, so I'm not too sure why they're doing it like that these days. This is something that is typical not just of this title or this series, but it seems to be something that affects many books in the Osprey catalog. It's a little strange. One other minor issue is with the, at this point, standardized format. You get sections on the different armies involved, short biographies of the commanders, the various plans, the action itself, and then a concluding section with further reading, and in this case, a short guide to the battlefield. Earlier, osprey titles for campaigns would often talk about wargaming it, but they seem to have gotten away from that after a while, is that if you know already the biography of Arthur Wellesley, for example, then you want to get more information on the rather obscure military actions that are going to be discussed, instead of, yes, he had success in India, yes, Napoleon didn't necessarily think much of his officers he had to send out into the field, that sort of thing. I understand that to some extent Osprey wants to standardize, and it often can be an advantage when dealing with battles or campaigns or individuals that are less well known to the average military history reader, but it is something to consider. If you understand what you're getting into with the format, this is an excellent book on from a military perspective, rather obscure series of combats, as well as giving some analysis about why the British public was so demanding that, first of all, things change as far as the army was concerned, and secondly, why Wellesley was able to achieve a level of fame and eventually command that would demonstrate his abilities throughout Spain and eventually at Waterloo. Typically, for books that I like, I usually think about them as far as how frequently I'm going to reread something. It's a little more difficult with Osprey titles. They have a formula, and unless I'm feeling like I'm going to want more on a specific topic, it's hard to necessarily give my usual every year, every couple years, every 5 years type of guesstimate. So I'll leave it out on this one, but if you are interested, then by all means, add this to your collection, even if the maps and the way they're cut up is rather odd. As always, if you enjoyed this review, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you again shortly.